Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement, getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, and Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on us authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Good evening. Welcome to Day 8, and welcome to the Festival of Storytellers. I'm GACCETTA, and I would like to welcome you to the last session of Day 8. Thank you, Reader's Magnet, for having such an extraordinary event. I want you to know that this is also live streaming on the Reader's Magnet Facebook page and their YouTube page, their YouTube channel. I'm the author of 2 books. I'm the author of Generations of Good Food, which is a compilation of 200 recipes from my mother's Italian family. And it would make a wonderful Christmas gift for people on your list. And this is the book that we're going to be talking about now, One Caregiver's Journey. This is about the 9.5 years that I cared for my mother when she broke her hip at my brother's home at dinner and passed away at the age of 102 in my home. She was 93 when she got hurt. Check out my Facebook page at facebook.com/ELEANOR GACCETTA. That's my website, onecaregiversjourney.com. I'm on Instagram. There's my Facebook page where I'm getting ahead of my booth helper. And then I would also like to offer any of you who are U.S. residents, if you want a copy of my book, please send me your name and address in the contact box on the website. My books are available on Amazon, on Barnes & Nobles, at the Reader's Magnet bookstore, and from my booth right where you're streaming from. Tonight, we're going to talk about one of the more difficult topics, but it's also one of the more necessary topics. Tonight, we're going to talk about things to do when you pre-plan a funeral. Especially when you're a caregiver, this is something you really do need to think about. According to the National Funeral Directors Association, 62% of consumers feel that it is important to share their funeral wishes with their family members. Yet only 21% of them do. And that means more than 2/3 of Americans acknowledge that pre-planning is a good idea, but the majority of them never get around to it and actually do anything about it. And why would that be? Usually life gets in the way. Too many other things, they get too busy. There's always something more important to do with your time and your money. But there are many benefits to pre-planning a funeral, particularly if you are caring for an elderly relative. Having all of their affairs in order will relieve the family of the need to make difficult decisions at the time of loss. It will save money, and it will give you time to plan a meaningful and healing funeral service. This is a very difficult process to do when everyone is under stress and grieving a loss. Unfortunately, this is something I've had a considerable amount of experience doing. I believe I have told you all that I was responsible for my mother's youngest sister along with another cousin. We planned our aunt's funeral when she was in the hospital, and the doctors told us that we needed to get her affairs in order, and that meant planning her funeral as well as everything else. I helped my cousin plan her mother's funeral. I did my brother and I did my mother's. So, and it doesn't get any easier, and it isn't a very pleasant thing, but it's something that we need to do. The first thing on Ellie's 8 tonight in planning a funeral is have the talk. Make sure you have the talk with your loved ones and that you know their wishes. Many times this is really a tough thing to do. For me, it was relatively easy. My mother's sister was visiting one Sunday afternoon, and I had received the documents, which are here. They were booklets called 5 Wishes. And so I opened up one book for each of them, and we sat at the kitchen breakfast bar, and they had coffee, and I would ask them questions that were coming in the book, like, what do you want, and how do you want this, and where would you like to go, and what kind of music do you want? And one of the biggest mistakes that people make, is not communicating their wishes to their family. You know what those wishes are, and stick to them. Because many will go into detail that include, this is the dress I want to wear. This is what I want you to put me in. These are the clothes I want to be buried in. Don't forget to put this in, or don't forget to do that. It's not an easy discussion to have. But if the opportunity arises, it can be a fruitful experience, and it will save you a lot of angst later on. Plus, you know what to do when you get there. It's easier to say, don't do that. I think that these are the kinds of things you need to do. So this talk is tough. To have. But in my case, it wasn't so bad. They talked amongst themselves, and one wanted this and one wanted that, and they both laughed about different things that I would ask. So then that brought us to the second part of this. The second thing is to pre-plan the funeral. Have the decisions made. And the majority of it, if not all of it, paid for at the time of death. It's important to ensure that you have enough information about the process and what the wishes are of the person that you are planning, whose funeral you're planning. Take care of the cemetery needs at the same time you go to the mortuary. think of it as a full package deal. You have a service and the remains have to be brought someplace else. In my case, here in Denver, where I am, the Archdiocese of Denver has a facility that they run a cemetery and a mortuary. So it's kind of one-stop shopping. And if you're in the boat that I was in at the time of my mother's passing and at the time of my aunt's passing, because my mother was not well at that point, it's nice. One-stop shopping is nice. You go, you do what you have to do, and you're not running all over town. We had a lot of grands and great-grandkids that we would have had to get in and out of cars, and we just didn't want to do that. We went to one place. Don't plan a funeral in a vacuum. This is number 3. Make sure your family is well aware of your thoughts and consider other opinions. Know your budget and stick to it. Don't be swayed by your loved one deserves the very best, because you may not be able to afford the very best. Maybe another lower grade is just as well as the very best. Let's face it. They all go in a hole somewhere, or in a crypt. They go in I don't know what they call that little thing where they put remains, but they go on your mantle at home, but they go someplace. And do you really need to have a $17,000 casket? Make sure that everyone who's involved in the process expresses their views, their wishes, and their opinions. And try to find a way to balance everybody's viewpoint. I have a question that says, are there support groups that families can go to if they can't afford much of it? If you have a family member who is on Medicaid, Medicaid does offer a burial. Most states, Colorado has a burial plan for Medicaid recipients. There are some entities, and your county Department of Human Services would be the place that would be able to find that information. Number 4 is don't let friends become part of the decisions. Don't be swayed. Don't be swayed by what others want you to do. Don't be swayed by other opinions in the deciding factors. Sometimes friends and family want to participate in the decision-making process or tell you what to do. That happened to me when my mother passed away. I had a relative who pretty much had her funeral planned out in her head, but and was very, very hurt and angry and upset when I told her that my brother and I were doing it. I thanked her, and she was not a part of any of it. It's okay to thank people. Their intentions are well. They're well-intentioned. They don't mean to hurt you. They want to help you, but they don't want to help you with your loved one's desires or the way your loved one wanted this to go. And it's sometimes that's kind of the worst part of it. You know what they wanted, you know how to do it, you know where it should go, and then you have everybody else bombarding you with their opinions, their suggestions, their thoughts. Stick to the budget, stick to the plan. Don't be swayed. The next one is don't base your plan solely on the price. Ask questions and understand all of the costs. Understand what's included in the different funeral packages, because they might all sound alike, but they're not. Know what you're getting for your dollar. Know what you're getting for your money. There's just commercial after commercial after commercial about the different funeral homes here. And one of them in particular puts up a slide of, this is what funeral director A charges, and this is what funeral B charges, and this is how much lower we are in cost, and this is how much we charge, and you get a good deal with us. But look at the fine print. You may not get the same deal. You may not get the same, your money may not go as far or be as nice. Remember more than anything that dying isn't cheap. We had a neighbor who used to always say to my mother and I, if George knew what it cost to die, he wouldn't have gone. And you know what? She was probably right. And not just for George, but for all the other Georges that had to sit in their heavenly box and watch what was happening with their family, trying to plan and pay for their funeral. The next one is, don't pay the wrong way. Number 6. Consider who will be attending the service. Well, that's actually number 7, but number 6 is, don't pay the wrong way. There are many, many ways to pay for funerals. Some people have insurance policies that will cover funeral expenses. Know what those policies include. My aunt, my poor mother's sister, was scammed with a funeral policy that had services that would occur at a funeral home that had gone underwater, and her burial plot was at the pauper's plot in a mountain cemetery. She had already had a plan with the Catholic cemetery here in Denver, and they would not honor that. You had to go where they wanted you to go. I had a friend who lived in the mountain community who was the one that told me where this plot would be. Funeral homes and cemeteries will allow you to make payments if you pre-plan. If you wait until your loved one has passed, then you're kind of out of luck, because you will have to pay all the costs at that time. And funeral expenses rise relatively high in a relatively short period of time. You may see articles that say, we're going to be raising our prices next month. Plan your funeral now. By paying in a funeral in advance, sometimes you can reduce the cost and alleviate the stress of having to pay for it all at once at the time of your loss, when you're emotionally a wreck. And you can also save hundreds and thousands of dollars if you decide to prepay. Thank you, Anderson. Anderson said it's a practical thing to do. If you decide to prepay, make sure that you and your family have enough life insurance or cash on hand to pay for the funeral expenses. Keep in mind that even though a life insurance policy is a death policy, those funds will not be dispersed 6 to 8 weeks after the funeral. So unless you're making arrangements with a funeral home and a cemetery, you're still going to have to, you may have to take out a loan. You're still going to have to find the money, because they're not going to wait 8 weeks for their money, I can assure you. Now I'm going to go to consider who will be attending the service. This is a tough topic, Kendra. It is a tough topic. And it's something that all of us will have to face at one time or another. Consider who will be attending the service. And use your judgment when you plan the reception. You don't want young children to be frightened by a service or frightened by death. When my mother passed away, just before the service, the pastor who was going to say her funeral mass came back and met with the family. And he was talking about his eulogy. And my brother said to him, keep it light. Look at all these young kids we have here. We don't want them to be afraid. And he did keep it light. He kept it almost too light, but he kept it light. He was very interactive with the people who were attending her service. And that was really kind of a nice thing. And in the same vein, when you're planning a reception after a funeral, don't think everybody that's attending the service is going to get in their car and drive someplace else to eat. You have to be able to figure this using a sound judgment of who's going to come. I had a relative who passed away 2 weeks ago, and I helped with the reception, and 200 people came to that reception. And they had anticipated more than that, but that was a lot of people to feed, a lot of people to try to greet, a lot of people to do a lot of stuff. Well, I'm going to get into that. I'm going to get into this very question from Fairgrower 1457 right now with number 8. So while you're at it and you're planning everybody else's funeral, Nikki, you want to go to number 8? Can you go to number 8 for me, please? While you're planning everybody else's funeral, think about planning your own. Think about pre-planning your own. The worst situation to be in is to have to procrastinate it, and then you're faced with not having enough time or resources to plan your loved one's funeral. Your mind is, I mean, trust me, if you think you're nuts, you're nuts. That's the worst place to be in, is to be sitting on the couch saying, now what do? We don't have the money. We don't have any plans. We don't know what you wanted. And the other worst thing you can do is not plan at all and leave the burden to those that you leave behind. Think about planning your own funeral. I know it's the last thing you want to think about. It was the last thing I wanted to think about. But my family shouldn't have to be burdened with this kind of a responsibility. They shouldn't have to be thinking about, well, what would she want? How would she want it? What would she be thinking about? What should we do? My family doesn't have to worry about that, because I had a cousin who was my age who died very suddenly 12 years ago. I mean, we were young. And she died very suddenly of a brain aneurysm. And it absolutely scared the pee-waddle out of me, to be real honest with you. And I found myself just nuts. And I had planned my aunt's funeral. And that was about the time that my brother and I were talking about planning our mothers. We knew that basically what we wanted to do was base it all pretty much on what my aunt had, which I had all of that paperwork. did not have the funeral people come here and lay everything out on the table and talk to you. We did not try to find someone to stay with her so we could go and make the plans. I did it all over the phone with the same lady who planned my aunt's. Now, this information is all super good and well, but even though you pay for that funeral, you don't pay for all of it. And when your loved one dies, plan on spending another couple of hours at least at the funeral home to finish planning it. Because what you haven't paid for is you haven't paid for flowers. You haven't paid for music. You haven't paid for a notice if you want to put it in a newspaper or if you want to put it in a some sort of a public notice page. And you haven't paid for the pastor. You haven't paid for whoever the officiator is of this event. So even though you think it's paid for, you need to have a couple extra $100,000, couple $1,000 with you when you go, because you're still going to do that, and you haven't planned the reception, so you're going to have to pay for that as well, unless everybody's going to bring food and everybody's going to chip in. That didn't happen with my mother. We had it catered because everybody was a wreck, and I did not have time to stand in the kitchen and cook for 150 people, which is what showed up at her funeral reception. But these are difficult topics to talk about, but they are incredibly necessary topics to talk about. And as much as you don't want to think about it, it's going to happen. Nobody gets out of this world alive, so everybody's going to have something. And the only way you get away from having a funeral or having to do any of these plans is if you decide to donate your body to science. And even that's a process that you have to go through. And even then your loved ones may want to have a memorial service for you that has to be planned. So, during the pandemic, I think a lot of this came to life for a lot of people. During the pandemic, funerals were very, very, they were sad. They were impersonal. You could have 10 people. They were live streamed. Excuse me. You could have 10 people. They were live streamed. Some people didn't even get to have a funeral. I had a very good friend whose mother passed away in the nursing home. We went into lockdown in April. His mother passed away in May. They sent her body to the funeral home. They had all that information. The funeral home cremated her, and they sent her remains to the military cemetery here in Colorado because her husband was a World War II veteran. The cemetery called the son and said, "Here's the plot where we have buried your mother." They also took all of her personal belongings that she had, boxed them up, and put them on the steps in front of the nursing home and told him to come get them. This lady's husband was devastated. He wanted to just hold her hand. That's all he wanted to do. There was no contact. She was in those four walls. She died alone. They were married 77 years. They were married 77 years. And now, they're still dealing with that. I'm sorry for your loss, Fairgoer 587. And yes, it's difficult, but it's something that everybody needs to think about. So before we sign off for tonight, let's just kind of wrap up. Have the talk, not that talk. Have the talk. Have the talk about what your loved one wishes and adhere to their wishes. Pre-plan the funeral so the majority is done when death occurs. Don't do it in a vacuum. Share it with your family and stick to the budget. Don't let the family, where am I here? Don't do it in a vacuum. Don't let friends become part of your decision. Don't plan based solely on the price. Know what you're paying for. Know what you're paying for. Don't pay the wrong way. Know that your planning depends upon how you can pay. Consider who's going to be attending the reception. Consider who will be attending the service, what kind of a service you'd like to have. And don't procrastinate. Don't procrastinate. Think about planning your own funeral, and don't leave somebody else burdened with that. And it does remind us of our mortality and our loved ones and how we feel about them. In Fairgoer 1770, I was so young when my grandpa left us. I was young when my father's father died, and my mother's father died even before I was born. So I understand that. So with this topic, as hard as it is to talk about at times, it's something that's very, very necessary for a caregiver to think about. So that's going to do it for us tonight. You have a great rest of your evening. Stay safe. Bye for now. See you tomorrow for another round of Ellie's 8. And tomorrow we're going to be doing another tough topic, how to choose a nursing home. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Reader's Magnet. Bye-bye.